Hey guys, this is going to be an ad lib review of what I showed you at our meeting last Thursday. And I wanted to get the whole job done, so this is about a 7-minute video. With the graphics I didn't get to show you the other night. In review then, Enneagram are three groups of three types, right? These are, for sake of argument right now, this symbol helps us compare different types of people. Those same three themes of head, heart, and gut, though, can also be used for an internal examination and dynamics that are happening inside everybody. Everybody's got a head, heart, and a gut. So to review, we're going to be examining how this breakout model can be helpful to you. So the way we built that, as you saw last Thursday, was that thematics themed in body parts is not a new thing. Head, heart, and gut is our grouping. Psychologists will tell you that we can become identified with patterns of thoughts, patterns of feelings, and patterns of behavior come under scrutiny so that we might have more choicefulness about it. A spiritual teacher comes in, though, and says, there's something about this head energy that's about knowing without thoughts, about an open-hearted state that has nothing to do with our own feelings and a physical presence that is its own deal as well. Enneagram language connects all these things, times 9 types. In the head center, there's a notion psychologically of the worldview, and on the receptive side, a holy idea. In the heart center, passion or vice. On the receptive side, the virtue. And the gut center, then, behaviorally, we have subtypes, and it does not articulate a present physical state. Rename these columns, receptive consciousness and active consciousness. We'll rearrange a little bit. Put a line between those two because that's a dynamic that we're interested in. And spread these out a little bit because there's a further dynamic to be able to talk about in that spread out state. Speaking of which, there's a way of approaching the internal dynamics that I'm going to trot out for you. If we travel across this diagram from left to right, there's a layer of meaning, and from right to left is another. Moving from active consciousness to receptive, and then from receptive to active. And there's a flow to that whole story. Let's see how I do talking about it. Left to right first. What are our most easily recognized things, but our external behaviors? We can identify these in a certain way and be identified by them in a certain way, and frankly never give it much more thought than that. I'm just going to use the notion of excavation that therapists might use. So let's examine, please, underneath these behaviors, whether they're problematic or not. There are patterns of thought that govern them, or are causal in some ways to them. And Enneagram helps us find the one that is perhaps thematic of others, is persistent and automatic, and in many ways running unconsciously. Even though we may think of this pattern as having lots of freedom in it, and it does, there's still a singularity to it that, when brought under observation, starts to become an interesting thing. Underneath that pattern of thought, then, is also, a good therapist will be getting at this, there's actually a pattern of an emotive stance that relates to that pattern. And maintaining that becomes something of an exercise and I don't want to call it an effort, but we want to maintain this state for reasons we'll get to in a few minutes. And there's a certain vitality or necessity to maintain that state. It is what is motivating and gluing together both the thoughts and the behaviors that we have just dug our way through. This little musk guy here, overlapping the centers, is a curiosity. When that relaxes, when it's not like in our pony image, being uh, spurred into a trot of some kind, uh, we might think of being in a more receptive state, where our physical being is in an unagented acceptance of what's going on. Our emotive state is navigable without much issues. We're riding the waves. And connected to all of that, notice that these are stacked vertically. There's an alignment to this experience that doesn't emphasize one over the other. The mindset, this is a tricky articulation. That holy idea is a thematic that is of great importance to us. It might even be called a value system. And that's our turning point to start coming from right to left. There is, across our chart here, there is a notion that we are born with the holy idea. And in the developmental notion, our child state has the gift of a proclivity towards the divine in this particular era. Remember, there are 9 of these holy ideas. One of them is ours and forms the basis of much of how we experience life. And we'll see in a minute how we wind up limiting our experience because of it. It's not the holy idea's fault, though. We come into life with a proclivity and an understanding, a way to understand what's going on via this one portal. Our emotive state connects to that, and all is well in the world. This is the child state. Then comes normal psychological development, which means there's an ego that is going to take charge of things. Lots of notion around shifts in the holding environment and attachment theory. We're attached to this thematic over here. It's the basis of our good experience. When the holding environment shifts, we're like, oh, there's something wrong that my receptive state has somehow or another proved itself to be inconsistent. So what do? We feel wounded by that, and then we take on the burden of that loss. Enneagram writers will take whole books to talk about what that move might look like and unpack that in many different ways. The notion is this experience of a loss is taken on in the ego development. There are 3 thematics yet again. One group of people might decide, well, what we're going to need to do is keep bailing. Another group is going to say, how do I relate in this strange environment? And a third group says, well, time to bring on the power tools. All of this is picturing an emotive state that is taken on. We just crossed into active consciousness, right? And this emotive state is something we then build on. So turning out into the world, we'll move up into our head center and start looking for corroboration for this emotive state in the outside world. And we start building a very juicy story. What are the justifications, protections, belonging, and forgetting, all of which are mental strategies to create a world, that's why we're calling it worldview, in which there is a place and some support for this emotive state that we've decided is a reality. That mental state starts to build its own grooves. The world corroborates the story that we're putting onto it, and so we keep telling that story. And perhaps most significantly, we mentally become essentially a dog with a bone, that our attention is organized in a certain direction to support that emotive state Here we have a cognitive, emotive pattern that runs the show, and our behaviors over here are the results of those, and in some ways are themselves a way of our forgetting that we have created that cognitive, emotive pattern in the background. At some point in maturity, we realize, my gosh, I'm telling a story that without thinking, without really feeling anything, and it's simply repetitive. I'm doing it again, and I don't know why. With that becomes the thematic. Notice we have a little star on either corner of the model. All of this active creation through ego development and then ego repetition is themed on that holy idea. Remember, the loss of it and the recreation of it is our effort. At some point in unpacking all this, we realize that our performance of that theme is in some ways a poor imitation of it. Because after all, we did not create it in the first place. Our creating an enormous pattern to support its existence is in some ways an act, is a friendly term. The mimic of that holy idea theme. That can be a rich level of unpacking stuff as well. So I'm going to end this at this point, trying to give you an appreciation of what this chart is doing for you. When you fill your own themes in, which is in our little box chart, we all have a holy idea, virtue, passion, worldview, and 3 behavioral words that signal this. Any one of them can signal that we're on the chart. We're on the chart. Ultimately, trusting that the chart is real helps us choose an intervention for ourselves that might bring us to more presence for the situation at hand, rather than off into a pony-driven interpretation of it. So hopefully this recorded. Look forward to seeing you again. Bye.